Hi, everyone. That's actually a play on words. It will make more sense in a moment. So, welcome back to Sentimental Elephants, a musical journey. We're getting two for one in this video. We'll be covering two letters at once. There's a reason for that. I'll explain in a bit. The letters we'll be covering will be H and I. So, hi. That's that clever play on words I was alluding to earlier. So we're getting hi today. And so H and I. There's a lot of great bands that start with H. It was a bit of an effort to try and figure out which one. There's Hawkwind. Originally, this was going to be a Hawkwind podcast. Jimi Hendrix, of course. Emmylou Harris. I love you, Emmylou. The Hold Steady, her amazing band. Isaac Hayes, very large in my legend. PJ Harvey. The High Llamas. Peter Hamill. Humble Pie. Juliana Hatfield, whom I've met. She's a very lovely person, very beautiful, wonderful artist. House of Love, who are big favorites of mine. Scratch my nose here. Mickey Hart from the Grateful Dead, whose solo albums are incredible. Steve Hackett, lead guitar player for Genesis. Husker Du, Minnesota punk legends. Alan Holdsworth, John Lee Hooker. Warren Haynes, who is right now, I'm certain, probably playing 4 different concerts at the same time in 4 different venues. And quick shout out to Angelina Hunter Trio, who are an amazing Ottawa band. They are incredible musicians and they're great folks. And if you get a chance to see them live, go do that because they utterly rock. I is a smaller number, a little smaller field. The Isley Brothers, of course. Ernie Isley is just one of the greatest guitar players I've ever heard. The Innocence Mission, Chris Isaac, Indigo Girls, Janice Ian. I do want to take a moment to give a shout out to my voice teacher and friend Jennifer, who, among the many, many wonderful things she's brought into my life, she was the one who turned me on to the album Between the Lines by Janice Ian, and I very strongly recommend you listen to that whole album because it's a little bit of a masterpiece. Thanks so much, Teach. You rock. And sorry, I keep scratching my face. Last but not least, the Manchester early '90s really fun keyboard band in Spiral Carpets. They weren't huge, but they were very fun. What are we going to be doing today? Well, H will be for Hunters and Collectors, and I is for, try to get the glare out of that, Icehouse. Both of these bands are from Australia. And I want to talk a bit about Australian music and go in a little bit on New Zealand as well. Just quickly touch on why I'm doing these two letters at once. Is it, when I started putting them together and trying to figure out, particularly with the field being a bit smaller, and I did want to do Icehouse, it would have wound up being 2 kind of small short videos, and I thought, well, hey, they're both from Australia. Let's put them together and make a bit of a longer video. So that's what I'm going to be doing. As I said, I want to touch on also a little bit on the music of New Zealand. Now, my apologies to any Kiwis who are watching. I don't know that much about the bands of New Zealand. Smaller country. Keith Urban and Lords are, not things I've really gotten into at this point. There's some cool bands like Bailter Space, Straight Jacket Fits, The Bats. I've heard good things. I've heard a little bit about them, but again, I don't really know enough about them to speak at them about length. But I can recommend 2 awesome New Zealand bands. The first, the somewhat more obscure one, which is the Verlaines, who I believe were named after an homage to Tom Verlaine for television. That might be just an urban myth, but that was my understanding of their name. Very cool band. If you could check out a song by them called Heavy 33, it is amazing. And of course, the biggest, in my eyes, New Zealand music legends of all, Split Enz. Um, I first heard about them a lot. Well, they kind of, I think they might have broke out in Canada a bit first, at least as far as North America, with the album True Colors. I later discovered they had a whole kind of cool career beforehand, but True Colors is sort of where my journey with them starts, and they put out several amazing albums after that. Lots of great songs. History Never Repeats is probably my favorite, but things like 6 Months in a Leaky Boat, or What's the Matter with You, or I Got You, or the Message to My Girl. Also, one of the last songs. It was later done by Crowded House, which we'll get to in a moment. But the song "I Walk Away," I think I prefer the original version from Split Enz. If you can check that out, "I Walk Away" off their final album, "See You Around." Now, they had two amazing songwriters in the band, two brothers, Tim Finn, who was with them from the beginning, and later his brother Neil joined Neil Finn. And when the band broke up, they went on separate paths. Tim started a solo career. It actually started a bit before the last album from Split Enz. He wasn't even on the last album, I don't think. He started a solo career then. He's got actually a number of really good songs and good solo albums. If you can track down a song that he wrote with Richard Thompson called "Persuasion," it's a very beautiful song. Now, Neil went on to even bigger success when he formed the group Crowded House, and I saw them live. They're all kinds of awesome. Well-established legacy. He also has his own solo career, and he formed Crowded House. That's, I consider, a little bit of a split credit between Australia and New Zealand, because the original three members of the band were original members of the band were himself, Paul Hester, who was the last drummer in Split Enz, and he was from Australia, and also another Australian, Nick Seymour, on bass. He's the brother of Mark Seymour, who is the lead singer for for Hunters and Collectors. So there's a tie-in there. So that's the music of New Zealand. As I said, huge Split Enz fan, so they've got a wealth of great material. Strongly encourage people to explore that a bit. So I'm going to dip into a little bit of the history of Australian popular music, at least the stuff that I know about. I won't get too comprehensive, but I believe the first real breakout Australian band, or successful Australian band from the kind of the modern era, the sort of rock and pop era, were sort of a more folk-oriented band called the Seekers. Georgie Girl was a lovely song. Was played, I think, a fair bit around my household by my parents. They also had a song called "I'll Never Find Another You," which is also great. In the late '60s, there was another band called the Easy Beats. Their biggest song is probably "Friday on My Mind," which is a very catchy chorus. Something's happening in the city. Da-ba-da-ba-da-do. I got my girl, she's so pretty. Sorry if I mangled the lyrics. That was covered by David Bowie on Bowie Pinups. It's a super fun song. They also did a really cool one as well called "Sorry," which if you look that up, I think people would enjoy that. Little bit of a neat note with regards to the Easy Beats. I believe the two guitar players, they might have been the songwriters as well, but the two guitar players were a couple of guys named Harry Vanda and George Young. They would later go on to form a band called Flash Into the Pan, and the big song I know of theirs is called "Hey St. Peter," and which was played a lot in, I believe, the late '70s. That's a lot of fun. I was listening to that earlier today. Listen to it if you haven't heard it before. But they're also formed. Harry Van and George Young also formed a production group, a production duo. And George Young is the brother of Malcolm and Angus Young from AC/DC, and they produced, Harry Vand and George Young produced a few of the early AC/DC albums. So yeah, so that's another of their contributions to Australian rock. Now, when you get to the 70s, there were a few Australian bands that or artists that of note. Usually mentioned are Olivia Newton-John and the Bee Gees, although I believe Olivia Newton-John and the Bee Gees were both born in England. I think Olivia Newton-John was from Cambridge, and the Bee Gees were born on the Isle of Man. But they're by way of Australia, and they had a lot of success in the 70s. Both great artists. Olivia Newton-John was my first celebrity crush. True story. And the Bee Gees, legendary artists. Bunch of different styles, amazing. Success through several decades. So I'm at this point, I'm going to say I'm not ashamed to say I love that band. Also, Little River Band were kind of another big Australian band from the 70s. Had several great songs. Reminiscing, Lonesome Loser was a really good one. Night Owl did a few other hits. Where are we at? And early 80s, we had kind of another band that kind of wore their sort of Australian heritage quite proudly, which is Men at Work. I had the Business as Usual album, their first album. Down Under, of course, is classic song. Kind of bothers me when people refer to them. Oh yeah, they were one-hit wonders. Like they weren't. It's like, well, what hits do they have besides Down Under? It's like that wasn't even their first hit. Their first hit was Who Can It Be Now, and they had a few others. Overkill was obviously a huge song and really, really powerful songwriting by Colin Hay. And this is about where I came in with my sort of greater consciousness of Australian artists in the mid 80s, coming of age in my mid teens. The local radio station that I listened to at that time had an awesome format, which was no real format. They just play all kinds of really cool music. Unfortunately, they kind of later shifted over to classic rock, which just basically meant that they played the same artists that every other radio station played exactly 3 songs from those artists. And okay, you don't really need to hear this rant, but I love their more free-form format of the mid 80s to the early 90s. And they had an ongoing joke of as well as here's their Australian band of the month, because I don't know what happened. They had some sort of pipeline to Australian music, and they kept promoting a lot of kind of cool, sometimes lesser known, sometimes bands that would become to more well known, but artists from Australia. Now, probably the biggest 2 that came out during that period would be Midnight Oil and In Excess. I think In Excess became bigger, but Midnight Oil really seem to have the sort of strongest Australian identity. I actually, most people got into Midnight Oil or heard about them through the Diesel and Dust album with Beds Are Burning, which is a classic song. But I actually managed to get tipped off to them a couple albums before that. There was an album called 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Really bounces off the tongue, that one. And I was watching in the early 80s, they just had shows that just showed videos for an hour. This is before, MTV was around and they were actually playing music videos, but we didn't have them in Canada. I don't know if much music was around at that point. If it was, I didn't have it. But I would watch one of these shows that just show videos. I think I mentioned that in my Kate Bush video, and might have even been the same show. But they played this song called "Power and the Passion," and I was riveted. It's a real had an aggressive sound, a real sort of take no prisoners. There's this cool, weird drum solo in the middle, and The line, sometimes you have to take the hardest line. I thought, wow, this is really some good, intense stuff. So I was aware of them before uh, before the Diesel and Dust album. Um, In Excess, as I said, became a bit bigger, oh, not like substantially bigger, but I personally lean more towards their material before Need You Tonight and Kick when they got really, really big. I enjoy most. I mean, they had great material throughout, but songs like Original Sin or Melting in the Sun or Don't Change, they just had this kind of real freshness to it that I that's kind of the stuff that appealed to me the most from that band. But there were a lot of other cool kind of little bands that the radio station would play. Hoodoo Gurus, Mental as Anything. Mental as Anything had the song called, I believe it was called Live It Up. And every time I hear it, it's just like pure sunshine. It's just this beautiful, joyous song. Also another band called Paul Kelly and the Messengers, which were thereabout around at the time, and they had some good songs. One other band I really want to touch on, they're kind of ones that are my favorites, that in North America they're thought of more as one-hit wonders, which is Divinyls. Much like the Eagles, I kind of have to stop myself saying the Eagles. No, I said the Eagles, but it's like the Divinyls. No, it's just Divinyls. In North America, they tend to be known more for one song, which is I Touch Myself, which is a cool song. But they had a bunch of really fiery, awesome singles before that. Back to the Wall is incredible. And when I get in a certain mood, I will go to that song. Sleeping Beauty, Science Fiction, Temperamental. What was the other song? Yeah, it's skipping me. It's escaping my mind right now. It'll come to me. Only Lonely. That's the song. Beautiful song. Check out the live version of it. Chrissy Amphlett, R.I.P. She passed away some years ago. Had some health problems, and it's really sad. But she was a very unique and powerful front person. Very kind of sensual but fierce vocals and a cool look, and she just rocked. And I really enjoyed this band. So if you can expand your view of Divinyls beyond just the one song, please do so. And the two bands that I'm going to discuss, we're 18 minutes into this video and I haven't really touched on them much. Hunters and Collectors and Icehouse. But first, as Julie Chen would say, I promise you I will talk about these bands. I do want to mention some other Australian bands I discovered after that that period of the mid to late 80s. They don't necessarily, all come from later, but that's when I discovered them. Nick Cave in any of his forms, The Birthday Party, and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Just one of my core artists, and in all of his different forms, I find his music just wonderful. A band that's sort of peripheral to Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, which is Crime in the City Solution. They're worth checking out in their own right. I'm a big fan of their live album, Adversary, Dolphins and the Sharks, Keepsake. These are very powerful songs that just utterly draw me in. The Church, again, mostly known for one song, which is Under the Milky Way. I did get to see them live once as well. They're really good. But this beautiful sort of dreamy sounds, always these incredible guitar playing, just really sweeps you in. They've got a lot more material other than the one song, although Starfish is an awesome album, as well as Priest Equals Aura. So again, they're worth digging into a bit more. Another band I discovered long after the fact are the Triffids. They've got an incredible album called Born Sandy Devotional. Powderfinger, I've got a 2-disc compilation of them, and every single song I've heard from there has just been awesome. And newer band I'm just starting to explore more, which is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Hard to describe their sound. They're very kind of bold, very left field sound. But I'm definitely enjoying the ride with those guys. So finally, on to 20 minutes now. We're now actually going to discuss the bands Hunters and Collectors and Icehouse. I'm going to start with Icehouse first. I'm not sure which of these two bands I heard of first, but we'll start with Icehouse. I think I might have heard the song "Hey Little Girl" first. It kind of buried into my subconscious. But the first time I really noticed them was on this radio station that I've been mentioning before. And they were talking about their newest release, um, which was the album Measure for Measure. And we're talking about a new song that they had. And they mentioned, oh, this was a band we noticed sounded like Roxy Music on one song. And here's a new song which is called No Promises, where they managed to sound like David Bowie and Roxy Music. And that immediately had my attention right away because those are two of my favorite artists whatsoever. And I was fascinated by the fact that Iva Davies, their lead singer, sorry for the weird face take, Iva Davies, their lead singer, was able on the same song to sound like, in different parts, David Bowie and Brian Ferry. I mean, he comes in like David Bowie. It was a winter palace in the Arabian Nights, white waves on an ocean, gems from a golden age. Just like, oh, Bowie. And then he immediately in the next verse, he's, life in your new world, spinning round and round, making some sense where there's no sense at all. And the more Brian Ferry sound is like, okay, that's a cool trick. And it was an awesome, beautiful sounding song. And I love the romance, the lyrics, and it really drew me in. And then later I kind of got back to Hey Little Girl, a song I heard earlier, and I swear that is possibly the best Roxy Music song that Roxy Music never recorded. But I was immediately riveted, and I would eventually get more of their albums, and eventually got all of their albums. And, beyond the resemblance to one of my favorite bands, like, you can do that, but you got to give me something more, prove to me that you've got something of your own. And they did. They have very wonderful songwriting. They can hit this exquisite melancholy, and they can make songs that make you feel just glad to be alive. I kind of like, this is a big country as the other band will make you feel both. They're great for both moods. They got a bit of wider North American airplay with the next album, which was A Man of Colors. The single that got pushed from that one was Electric Blue, which is a really good song. I mean, it's a perfectly cromulent song, but I didn't think it was, it was all right. I thought there was better material on it. I liked the single Crazy a bit more. Just kind of, I kind of could, it's this timeless appeal of the guy saying, I don't know what I'm just this guy, and I'm kind of a loser, and I don't know how I managed to deserve the love of this amazing, wonderful, beautiful woman. And it's like I can relate to that. I used to have that once upon a time. Moving on, getting a little maudlin here. Now, their first album, there's been a few different. There's a bit of a naming confusion for me with that one, because the version I had was just called Icehouse, and there's a song on it called Icehouse. I believe when I later got it on CD, the name of the album at that point was Flowers, and I believe the way it worked was originally the band was named Flowers, and the album was called Icehouse. I think they found out there was another band named Flowers, but they changed the name of the band to Icehouse, and the album got changed to Flowers. And when I got it, it was like band was Icehouse and the album was Icehouse. It has a bit of a different sound to it. It's a bit cooler. No, I don't mean just stylistically cooler. It has kind of a cold, icy feel, kind of that early 80s sound, kind of like Human League or Ultravox, or kind of a bit of Depeche Mode. it was really good on that album, but it kind of, the textures kind of warmed up on later albums like Primitive Man. Uh, Primitive Man had a song on it called Great Southern Land. It's sort of it's about Australia. I think once or twice I've seen it in movies where there's showing the Australian landscape and they play this song. It's a great song. I think it was used in the brief little I saw, or at least I saw a video of it, which was tied in with the movie Young Einstein with Yahoo Serious. Yes, folks, that was a thing that actually exists. But their album, their catalog is fairly consistent without it. It's high quality. It's wonderful songs throughout. Still will always love this band. As I mentioned before, Ivy Davies, just beautiful, evocative voice. Yes, it does have echoes of Brian Ferry and David Bowie, but also has its own quality, which is what I would always will look for. An imitation is good, but it's as long as I hear the right, I hear the actual person, in that, and I do that with Ivy Davies. Hunters and Collectors. I mentioned before Mark Seymour, their lead singer, principal songwriter, and one of their guitarists. His brother is Nick Seymour from Crowded House, bass player. I'm a little vague on when exactly I first heard them, but it was definitely in that sort of late 80s period. I know, or I believe they opened on the Diesel and Dust tour. They opened for Midnight Oil, and that was where a number of people saw them. I have encountered people in Ottawa say, "Oh yeah, I saw them open for Midnight Oil." I didn't see that show, but I was aware of them already at that point because, again, for the same radio station. I think the first song I heard theirs might have been. There's a few songs, I think, from the Human Frailty album, which is one of my all-time favorite album titles, Human Frailty. It's a real powerful one. There's some songs around that period from Back on the Breadline, Inside a Fireball, Do You See What I See? They got to play. They definitely they grabbed my interest. A lot of these songs, much like Midnight Oil, do have a strong social conscience and a bit of a sort of kind of working class conscience. Trying to sort of I know it's like, oh, social justice, like, no, but that's an important thing to think about, an important thing to fight for, just to be more aware of the world we're in and trying to do what's right. There's a later song from Ghost Nation called When the River Runs Dry. I keep listening to it. Unfortunately, it's still relevant. It's over 20 years old, I think, at this point. And it's like, yeah, people should still be thinking about this song. Their earlier material, when I discovered their whole catalog and listened to it from beginning to end, it was a bit more avant-garde. Some of it actually makes me think kind of a cross between Talking Heads, some of the more, kind of the more bolder work of Talking Heads, and Can, where the 70s German progressive rock band, kind of some very sort of interesting textures and atmospheres going on. Talking to a Stranger is kind of the standout track from that. Also another one from an early EP I heard, I just kind of blew my mind. It's called Tow Truck. They, even though their sound became a little more mainstream friendly, it was still had some punch to it. The horn, they had a horn section throughout their existence, and kind of very kind of really grabs the ear. Their sound did keep evolving through the years. They didn't just sort of settle on the one thing. There is a core sound, but they didn't stay in one place. There's an album from the early 90s called Cut, and they adopted some more electronic sounds from it. Also from that one, that particular album was one of my favorite songs. It's a very sad and beautiful song called True Tears of Joy, and it truly brings out the warm quality and just the real really evocative, really just emotional side of Mark Seymour's voice. Both Mark Seymour and Iva Davies from Icehouse. I can't say enough. They're incredible singers. Uh, I'm going to say this for both of these bands. You know, there's certain bands, okay, they're great, but maybe not everybody recognizes they're great. But there's certain bands you'll find, and you just kind of take them in as your own. You know, it's like you may go for a while without listening to them, but whenever you think of them, they will be just sort of, yeah, they're my people. They're kind of one of my bands. And if you find somebody who's into them, it's like, oh, and I was like, wow, you too. Yeah. You know, you get it too. Yeah. And both of these bands have sort of had that, you know, kind of, you know, those little places in my heart for them is, uh, and I think actually a bunch of Australian bands that kind of alluded to it with that, and some of the ones that I've mentioned before, like Divinals and the, you know, Nick Cave, Crime of the City Solution, and yeah, so on and so forth. There's a number of my favorite Australian bands. I don't know why it is specifically about the quality of these bands and them coming from Australia. I don't know if that's any effect on them at all, but you know, they just kind of like, yeah, they're just my special bands that I love. Never been to Australia. I don't know if I ever will. I've known a few Australians. They've been great people, but it's like, yeah, it's like something about certain Australian bands. I'll just do that for me. So just before we wrap up, two other things that I have that I can say that they have in common. I just refer to them as, I'm going to share this, the Australian bands that many people I know have never heard of, but I have really big comprehensive box sets of them. So this is the, yep, trying not to spill this one here. This is the one from Hunters and Collectors, which is called, I was trying to do this without spilling everything out, called Horn of Plenty. This is all their albums, including collections of singles and EPs and all sorts of extra goodies. And here is the Icehouse one, which I think is, I'm not sure if there's a real title to this one. Well, it's the Collected Works of Icehouse. Actually, no, there's a compilation album from Hunters and Collectors called Collected Works. But this is the complete albums from Icehouse. Again, with all sorts of extra tracks and all the albums. And both of these come with, there's a couple of DVDs or a few DVDs with each of them. They're Australian DVDs, but fortunately at this point I now do have a system that will play, I don't think it's quite all, but seems to be most international DVDs. So I get to enjoy these. But if you do you decide to splurge, just be aware that those, you know, there's still plenty of good music you can listen to on any system. Those of you who are like me and still listen to CDs, I think there might be one or two of you in the universe still out there. But if you do splurge on those, just be aware there's a certain content that you can only enjoy in certain circumstances. But I do strongly recommend both of these bands. They're worth exploring. So I'm just going to wrap this one up. Thank you for your patience. This is about nearly 35-minute long video. But yeah, I was wanted to talk a bit more about these fine bands. So thank you for coming along for the ride. Anzac Pride, and have a